The Fables of Aesop. In Part 7 of Aesop's Fables, we'll be reading again from the edition published by Hodder and Stoughton in London in 1909, and we'll be reading the stories between the trumpeter taken prisoner and the she-goats and their beards. Aesop's Fables. The trumpeter taken prisoner. A trumpeter, bravely leading on his soldiers, was captured by the enemy. He cried out to his captors, "Pray, spare me, and do not take my life without cause or without inquiry. I have not slain a single man of your troop. I have no arms, and carry nothing but this one brass trumpet." "That is the very reason for which you should be put to death," they said. "For while you do not fight yourself, your trumpet stirs up all others to battle." The Fox and the Crane. A fox invited a crane to supper, and provided nothing for his entertainment but some soup made of pulse, and poured out into a broad, flat stone dish. The soup fell out of the long bill of the crane at every mouthful, and his vexation at not being able to eat afforded the fox most intense amusement. The crane in his turn asked the fox to sup with him, and set before her a flagon with a long, narrow mouth, so that he could easily insert his neck and enjoy its contents at his leisure, while the fox, unable to even taste it, met with a fitting requital, after the fashion of her own hospitality. The Ass in the Lion's Skin. An ass, having put on the lion's skin, roamed about in the forest and amused himself by frightening all the foolish animals he met with his wanderings. At last meeting a fox, he tried to frighten him also, but the fox no sooner heard the sound of his voice than he exclaimed, "I might possibly have been frightened myself, had I not heard your bray." The Fox and the Lion. A fox saw a lion confined in a cage, and standing near him bitterly reviled him. The lion said to the fox, "It is not thou who revilest me, but this mischance which hath befallen me." The Goods and the Ills. All the goods were once driven out by the ills from that common share which they each had in the affairs of mankind. For the ills, by reason of their numbers, had prevailed to possess the earth. The goods wafted themselves to heaven and asked for a righteous vengeance on their persecutors. They entreated upon Jupiter that they might no longer be associated with the ills, as they had nothing in common and could not live together, but were engaged in unceasing warfare, and that an indissoluble law might be laid down for their future protection. Jupiter granted their request and decreed that henceforth the ills should visit the earth in company with each other, but that the goods should only one by one enter the habitations of men. Hence it arises that ills abound, for they come not one by one, but in troops, and by no means singly, while the goods proceed from Jupiter, and are given not alike to all, but singly and separately, and one by one to those who are able to discern them. The Sparrow and the Hare. A hare, pounced upon by an eagle, sobbed very much, and uttered cries like a child. A sparrow upbraided her, and said, "Where now is thy remarkable swiftness of foot? Why were your feet so slow?" While the sparrow was thus speaking, a hawk seized him on a sudden, and killed him. The hare was comforted in her death, and expiring said, "Ah, you who so lately, when you supposed yourself safe, exulted over my calamity, have now yourself reason to deplore a similar misfortune." The Man and the Satyr. A man and a satyr once poured out libations together in token of a bond of alliance being formed between them. One very cold, wintry day, as they talked together, the man put his fingers to his mouth and blew on them. On the satyr inquiring the reason of this, he told him that he did it to warm his hands, they were so cold. Later on in the day they sat down to eat, the food prepared being quite scalding. The man raised one of the dishes a little towards his mouth and blew in it. On the satyr again inquiring the reason for this, he said that he did it to cool the meat, it was so hot. "I can no longer consider you as a friend," said the satyr, "a fellow who with the same breath blows hot and cold." The Ass and His Purchaser. A man wished to purchase an ass, and agreed with its owner that he should try him before he bought him. He took the ass home and put him in the straw yard with his other asses, upon which he left all the others, and joined himself at once to the most idle and the greatest eater of them all. The man put a halter on him, and led him back to his owner, and on his inquiring how in so short a time he could have made a trial of him, "I do not need," he answered, "a trial. I know that he will be just such another as the one whom all the rest as he chose for his companion." A man is known by the company he keeps. The Flea and the Ox. A flea thus questioned the ox, "What ails you, that being so huge and strong, you submit to the wrongs you receive from men, and thus slave for them day by day, while I, being so small a creature, mercilessly feed on their flesh and drink their blood without stint?" The ox replied, "I do not wish to be ungrateful, for I am loved and well cared for by men, and they often pat my head and shoulders." "Woe is me," said the flea. "This very patting which you like, whenever it happens to me, brings with it my inevitable destruction." The Dove and the Crow. A dove shut up in a cage was boasting of the large number of the young ones which she had hatched. A crow, hearing her, said, "My good friend, cease from this unseasonable boasting. The larger the number of your family, the greater your cause of sorrow in seeing them shut up in this prison house." Mercury and the Workman. A workman, felling wood by the side of a river, let his axe drop by accident into a deep pool. Being thus deprived of the means of his livelihood, he sat down on the bank and lamented his hard fate. Mercury appeared and demanded the cause of his tears. He told him his misfortune, when Mercury plunged into the stream, and bringing up a golden axe, inquired if that was the one he had lost. On his saying that it was not, Mercury disappeared between the water a second time, and returned with a silver axe in his hand, and again demanded of the workman if it were his. On the workman saying it was not, he dived into the pool for the third time, and brought up the axe that had been lost. On the workman claiming it and expressing his joy at its recovery, Mercury, pleased with his honesty, gave him the golden and silver axes in addition to his own. The workman, on his return to the house, related to his companions all that had happened. One of them at once resolved to try whether he could not also secure the same good fortune to himself. He ran to the river and threw his axe on purpose into the pool at the same place, and sat down on the bank to weep. Mercury appeared to him just as he hoped he would, and having learned the cause of his grief, plunged into the stream and brought up a golden axe and inquired if he had lost it. The workman seized it greedily and declared that of a truth it was the very same axe that he had lost. Mercury, displeased at his knavery, not only took away the golden axe, but refused to recover for him the axe that he had thrown into the pool. The Bitch and Her Whelps. A bitch, ready to whelp, earnestly begged of a shepherd a place where she might litter. On her request being granted, she again besought permission to rear her puppies in the same spot. The shepherd again consented, but at last the bitch, protected with the bodyguard of her whelps who had now grown up and were able to defend themselves, asserted her exclusive right to the place, and would not permit the shepherd to approach. The Dogs and the Hides. Some dogs, famished with hunger, saw some cowhides steeping in a river. Not being able to reach them, they agreed to drink up the river, but it fell out that they burst themselves with drinking long before they reached the hides. Attempt not impossibilities. The Jackdaw and the Fox. A half-famished jackdaw seated himself on a fig tree, which had produced some fruit entirely out of season, and waited in the hope that the figs would ripen. A fox, seeing him sitting so long and learning the reasons of his doing so, said to him, "You are indeed, sir, sadly deceiving yourself. You are indulging a hope strong enough to cheat you, but which will never reward you with enjoyment." The Gnat and the Bull. A gnat settled on the horn of a bull and sat there a long time. Just as he was about to fly off, he made a buzzing noise and inquired of the bull if he would like him to go. The bull replied, I did not know you would come, and I shall not miss you when you go away. Some men are of more consequence in their own eyes than in the eyes of their neighbors. The Eagle and the Jackdaw. An eagle flying down from his eyrie on a lofty rock seized upon a lamb and carried him aloft in his talons. A jackdaw who witnessed the capture of the lamb was stirred with envy and determined to emulate the strength and flight of the eagle. He flew round with a great whir of his wings and settled upon a large ram with the intention of carrying him off. But his claws becoming entangled in his fleece, he was not able to release himself, although he fluttered with his feathers as much as he could. The shepherd, seeing what had happened, ran up and caught him. He at once clipped his wings, and taking him home at night, gave him to his children. On their saying, "Father, what kind of bird is it?" he replied, "To my certain knowledge he is a daw, but he will have it that he is an eagle." Jupiter, Neptune, Minerva, and Momus. According to an ancient legend, the first man was made by Jupiter, the first bull by Neptune, and the first house by Minerva. On the completion of their labors, a dispute arose as to which had made the most perfect work. They agreed to appoint Momus as judge and to abide by his decision. Momus, however, being very envious of the handicraft of each, found fault with all. He first blamed the work of Neptune, because he had not made the horns of the bull below his eyes, that he might better see where to strike. He then condemned the work of Jupiter, because he had not placed the heart of a man on the outside, that everyone might read the thoughts of the evil disposed, and take precautions against the intended mischief. And lastly, he inveighed against Minerva, because she had not contrived iron wheels in the foundation of her house, that its inhabitants might more easily remove if a neighbor should prove unpleasant. Jupiter, indignant at such inveterate fault-finding, drove him from his office of judge, and expelled him from the mansions of Olympus. The Flea and the Wrestler. A flea settled upon the bare foot of a wrestler, and bit him, on which he called loudly upon Hercules for help. The flea a second time hopped upon his foot, when he groaned and said, "O Hercules, if you will not help me against a flea, how can I hope for your assistance against greater antagonists?" The Two Bags. Every man, according to an ancient legend, is born into the world with two bags suspended from his neck, a small bag in front full of his neighbor's faults, and a large bag behind filled with his own faults. Hence it is that men are quick to see the faults of others, and yet are often blind to their own failings. The Stag at the Pool. A stag overpowered by heat came to a spring to drink. Seeing his own shadow reflected in the water, he greatly admired the size and variety of his horns, but felt angry with himself for having such slender and weak feet. While he was thus contemplating himself, a lion appeared at the pool, and crouched to spring upon him. The stag immediately betook himself to flight, and exerting his utmost speed as long as the plain was smooth and open, kept himself with ease at a safe distance from the lion. But entering a wood, he became entangled by his horns, and the lion quickly came up with him and caught him. When too late, he thus reproached himself, "Woe is me! How have I deceived myself? These feet which would have saved me I despised, and I gloried in these antlers which have proved my destruction." What is most truly valuable is often underrated. The Owl and the Birds. An owl, in her wisdom, counseled the birds, when the acorn first began to sprout, to pull it up by all means out of the ground, and not to allow it to grow, because it would produce the mistletoe, from which an irredeemable poison, the birdlime, would be extracted, by which they would be captured. The owl next advised them to pluck up the seed of the flax, which men had sown, as it was a plant which boded no good to them. And lastly, the owl, seeing an archer approach, predicted that this man, being on foot, would contrive darts armed with feathers, which would fly faster than the wings of the birds themselves. The birds gave no credence to these warning words, but considered the owl to be beside herself, and said that she was mad. But afterwards, finding her words were true, they wondered at her knowledge, and deemed her to be the wisest of birds. Hence it is that when she appears, they resort to her as knowing all things, while she no longer gives them advice, but in solitude laments their past folly. The Shepherd and the Sheep. A shepherd driving his sheep to a wood saw an oak of unusual size, full of acorns, and spreading his cloak under the branches, he climbed up into the tree and shook down the acorns. The sheep eating the acorns inadvertently frayed and tore the cloak. The shepherd, coming down and seeing what was done, said, "Oh, you most ungrateful creatures! You provide wool to make garments for all other men, but you destroy the clothes of him who feeds you." The Peasant and the Apple Tree. A peasant had in his garden an apple tree, which bore no fruit, but only served as a harbor for the sparrows and grasshoppers. He resolved to cut it down, and taking his axe in his hand, made a bold stroke at its roots. The grasshoppers and sparrows entreated him to not cut down the tree that sheltered them, but to spare it, and they would sing to him and lighten his labors. He paid no attention to their request, but gave the tree a second and third blow with his axe. When he reached the hollow of the tree, he found a hive full of honey. Having tasted the honeycomb, he threw down his axe, and looking on the tree as sacred, took great care of it. Self-interest alone moves some men. The Two Soldiers and the Robber. Two soldiers traveling together were set upon by a robber. The one fled away, the other stood his ground and defended himself with his stout right hand. The robber being slain, the timid companion runs up and draws his sword, and then throwing back his traveling cloak says, "I'll at him, and I'll take care that he shall learn whom he has attacked." On this, he who had fought with the robber made answer, "I only wished that you had helped me just now, even if it had been only with those words, for I should have been the more encouraged, believing them to be true. But now put up your sword in its sheath and hold your equally useless tongue, till you can deceive others who do not know you. I, indeed, who have experienced with what speed you run away, know right well that no dependence can be placed on your valor." The Trees under the Protection of the Gods. The gods, according to an ancient legend, made choice of certain trees to be under their special protection. Jupiter chose the oak, Venus the myrtle, Apollo the laurel, Cybele the pine, and Hercules the poplar. Minerva, wondering why they had preferred trees not yielding fruit, inquired the reason of their choice. Jupiter said, "It is lest we should seem to covet the honor for the fruit." But said Minerva, "Let anyone say what he will. The olive is more dear to me on account of its fruit." Then Jupiter said, "My daughter, you are rightly called wise, for unless what we do is useful, the glory of it is vain." Truth and the Traveler. A wayfaring man traveling in the desert met a woman standing alone and terribly dejected. He inquired of her, "Who art thou?" "My name is Truth," she replied. "And for what cause," he asked, "have you left the city to dwell alone here in the wilderness?" She made answer, "Because in former times falsehood was with few, but is now with all men, whether you would hear or speak." The Manslayer. A man committed a murder and was pursued by the relations of the man whom he murdered. On his reaching the river Nile, he saw a lion on its bank, and being fearfully afraid, climbed up a tree. He found a serpent in the upper branches of the tree, and again being greatly alarmed, he threw himself into the river, when a crocodile caught him and ate him. Thus the earth, the air, and the water alike refused shelter to a murderer. The Lion and the Fox. A fox entered into partnership with a lion on the pretense of becoming his servant. Each undertook his proper duty in accordance with his own nature and powers. The fox discovered and pointed out the prey. The lion sprung on it and seized it. The fox soon became jealous of the lion carrying off the lion's share, and said that he would no longer find out the prey, but would capture it on his own account. The next day he attempted to snatch a lamb from the fold, but fell himself a prey to the huntsman and the hounds. The Lion and the Eagle. An eagle stayed his flight, and entreated a lion to make an alliance with him to their mutual advantage. The lion replied, "I have no objection, But you must excuse me for requiring you to find surety for your good faith. For how can I trust anyone as a friend who is able to fly away from his bargain whenever he pleases? Try before you trust. The Hen and the Swallow. A hen, finding the eggs of a viper and carefully keeping them warm, nourished them into life. A swallow, observing what she had done, said, "You silly creature! Why have you hatched these vipers, which, when they shall have grown, will inflict injury on all, beginning with yourself?" The Lark Burying Its Father. The lark, according to an ancient legend, was created before the earth itself, and when her father died by a fell disease, as there was no earth, she could find for him no place of burial. She let him lie uninterred for 5 days, and on the 6th day, being in perplexity, she buried him in her own head. Hence she obtained her crest, which is popularly said to be her father's grave hillock. Youth's first duty is reverence to parents. The Ass and His Driver. An ass, being driven along the high road, suddenly started off and bolted to the brink of a deep precipice. When he was in the act of throwing himself over, his owner, seizing him by the tail, endeavored to pull him back. The ass, persisting in his effort, the man let go and said, "Conquer, but conquer to your cost." The Thrush and the Fowler. A thrush was feeding on a myrtle tree, and did not move from it on account of the deliciousness of its berries. A fowler, observing her staying so long in one spot, having well bird-limed his reeds, caught her. The thrush, being at the point of death, exclaimed, "O foolish creature that I am! For the sake of a little pleasant food, I have deprived myself of my life." The Eagle and the Fox. An eagle and a fox formed an intimate friendship and decided to live near each other. The eagle built her nest in the branches of a tall tree, while the fox crept into the underwood and there produced her young. Not long after they had agreed upon this plan, when the fox was ranging for food, the eagle, being in want of provisions for her young ones, swooped down and seized upon one of the little cubs and feasted herself and brood. The fox, on her return, discovering what had happened, was less grieved for the death of her young than for her inability to avenge them. A just retribution, however, quickly fell upon the eagle. While hovering near an altar on which some villagers were sacrificing a goat, she suddenly seized a piece of the flesh and carried it with her to her nest, a burning cinder. A strong breeze soon fanned the spark into a flame, and the eaglets, as yet unfledged and helpless, were roasted in their nest and dropped down dead at the bottom of the tree. The fox gobbled them up in the sight of the eagle. The She-Goats and Their Beards. The she-goats, having obtained by request from Jupiter the favor of a beard, the he-goats, sorely displeased, made complaint that the females equaled them in dignity. "Suffer them," said Jupiter, "to enjoy an empty honor, and to assume the badge of your nobler sex, so long as they are not your equals in strength or courage. It matters little if those who are inferior to us in merit should be like us in outside appearances." Okay. We'll conclude the stories of Aesop in Part 8 of Aesop's Fables. Good night, Nora.